Hello and welcome, or should I say all aboard, for a bit of a chat about something that's causing a fair few furrowed brows and, dare I say it, a frisson of, well, something across the British railway network. It's a rather large undertaking, this whole business of tinkering with who actually runs the trains, and it's got more twists and turns than the line to Mallaig, which, as you know, is saying something. We're talking about bringing things back in-house, so to speak, a concept many of us thought had been shunted into a disused siding some years ago. Right then, welcome to our deep dive into railway nationalisation in the UK. It's a phrase that conjures up all sorts of images, doesn't it? Perhaps sepia-toned pictures of chaps in flat caps polishing steam engines. Or maybe just the slightly less romantic notion of the government deciding it fancies having a go at timetables and tea trolleys. Today we'll explore what it means for the UK's railways and the potential impacts on passengers, because at the end of the day, it's us, the fare-paying public, who will be wondering if our commute will get any less, shall we say, character building. The truth is the railways have always been a bit of a political football, haven't they? Privatised, refranchised, and now it seems renationalised, or at least parts of it. It's enough to make your head spin faster than an HST power car at full chant. So let's try and unravel this rather complicated set of points and signals and see if we can make some sense of where this particular train is heading. Grab a brew, settle in, and let's get started. Now let's talk about South Western Railway, or SWR as it's snappily known. On May 20th, a rather significant date for railway enthusiasts and indeed for the government, it became the first of the current train operating companies to be, well, taken back under the government's wing. This isn't just a minor timetable adjustment, it's a proper shift in how things are done on a major commuter network serving the bustling lines into Waterloo. One does wonder why SWR was chosen to be the, shall we say, guest of honour at this particular nationalisation party. Was it simply its turn, or something more? The reasons, as ever with these things, are probably a bit of a muddle. Performance has certainly been a talking point for SWR, as it has for many operators, if we're being honest. Strikes, delays, and the general joy of trying to get from A to B on a wet Tuesday morning have all played their part. Perhaps the government saw an opportunity, or perhaps a necessity, to step in and say, right, let's have a go. It's a bold move, taking on such a complex and at times rather unloved part of the network as your first big project. It's important to understand what nationalisation means in this context. We're not necessarily talking about a wholesale return to the days of British Rail overnight, with everyone suddenly wearing the same uniform and drinking the same lukewarm tea from the buffet car. More likely, it means the Department for Transport, or an entity acting on its behalf, takes over the direct running of services, rather than a private company holding a franchise agreement. The nuts and bolts of it involve transferring staff responsibilities and, crucially, the risk from the private operator to the public purse. For the average passenger on the 8:15 from Woking, what does this actually mean on day one? Well, if truth be told, probably not a vast amount. The trains will likely look the same, the staff will be the familiar faces, and the timetable will, one hopes, remain broadly similar, at least initially. These transitions are designed to be as seamless as possible to avoid causing even more disruption than usual. The real changes, if they are to come, will be more gradual, more behind the scenes, affecting things like investment priorities and service specifications down the line. Still, the symbolism of SWR being the first is not to be sniffed at. It sends a signal, doesn't it, that the government is serious about this new direction outlined in various white papers and plans. It's a test case in many ways. If they can make a tangible, positive difference here on these busy and often challenging routes, then it might give them the confidence and perhaps the public backing to press on with other parts of the network. It's like the first biscuit in the new packet. A lot rests on it. The operator SWR is replacing, a joint venture between First Group and MTR, had its own share of challenges, as all franchise holders do. Running a railway is a fiendishly difficult business, especially one as densely packed as the South Western network. The franchise model itself has been under scrutiny for years, with critics arguing it prioritised profit over passengers, while proponents would say it brought investment and innovation. Now the pendulum is swinging back, and SWR is the first to feel that swing directly. Public and media reaction to SWR's nationalisation has been, as you'd expect, mixed. Some will cheer it as a victory for common sense and public service, hoping for a new era of accountability and passenger focus. Others will be more sceptical, perhaps worried about efficiency, or simply seeing it as a shuffling of the deck chairs rather than a fundamental solution to the railway's underlying problems. The comment sections, I imagine, are quite lively on this topic. It certainly provides plenty of fodder for discussion on the dog and duck. One mustn't underestimate the sheer complexity of unpicking a franchise agreement and transitioning the service. It's not just a case of changing the name above the door. There are contracts, assets, staff terms and conditions, IT systems, and 1,000 other details that need to be meticulously managed. It's a bit like trying to reassemble a complicated watch while it's still ticking. A proper headache for the civil servants involved, I'd wager. They'll need a lot of tea and biscuits to get through that lot. We've seen government interventions before, of course. LNER, for example, has been run by the operator of last resort for some time now. And Northern Trains was also brought under public control, so this isn't entirely uncharted territory. However, the context of Great British Railways and a more systemic shift makes the SWR situation feel a bit different, perhaps more indicative of a long-term strategy rather than just a temporary fix for a failing franchise. It's all part of a bigger picture, or so we're told. So as SWR embarks on this new chapter, all eyes will be on its performance, its passenger satisfaction levels, and whether this move genuinely heralds a better future for those who rely on its services. Is it a one-off, a special case dictated by circumstance, or is it the blueprint for how many more of our train lines will be run in the years to come? Only time, and perhaps a few more government announcements, will tell. Right, who's for another biscuit? Right, so South Western Railway has had its collar felt by the government. The big question now, the one that's probably being whispered in hushed tones in railway boardrooms up and down the country, is who's next? It's a bit like a game of musical chairs, but with multi-million-pound franchises and the fate of the nation's commuters at stake. One imagines a few train operating company, 2C, bosses are feeling a tad nervous, perhaps checking their performance figures with a little more diligence than usual. Speculating on which TOCs might be next in line for this nationalisation treatment is, of course, a bit like trying to predict the British weather, fraught with uncertainty. However, we can look at a few indicators. Poor performance is usually a good place to start. If a company consistently fails to run trains on time or cancels them with alarming regularity, the government, and indeed the long-suffering public, might start to think a change is in order. Passenger satisfaction surveys are another key barometer. A TOC languishing at the bottom of those tables is likely to be feeling the heat. Certain names do tend to crop up in disgruntled conversations and critical news reports more often than others. Avanti West Coast, for instance, has had its fair share of troubles with reliability and service provision on the vital West Coast main line. Transpennine Express has also faced significant criticism for cancellations and overcrowding in the north. These aren't the only ones, of course, but operators with a high public profile and persistent issues are naturally going to be under closer scrutiny when decisions about future management are being made. Then there's the financial stability of the operators. Running a railway is an expensive business, and some TOCs have found themselves in rather precarious financial positions, especially post-pandemic when passenger numbers took a significant hit. If a company is teetering on the brink or requiring substantial ongoing taxpayer support just to keep the lights on, the government might decide it's simpler and perhaps even cheaper in the long run to take direct control rather than continually propping up a private entity. This is particularly true if the franchise agreement is already up for renewal or review. The government's own pronouncements, or sometimes lack thereof, also offer clues. While they might not publish a hit list, statements about improving services in certain regions or the strategic importance of particular lines can indicate where their focus might lie. The Williams-Shapps Plan for Rail, which laid the groundwork for Great British Railways, talked a lot about simplifying the current fragmented system and bringing more cohesion. This suggests a broader ambition than just picking off the worst performers one by one. It hints at a more structured, albeit gradual, transition. We must also consider the expiry dates of the current franchise agreements. As these contracts come to an end, the Department for Transport has a natural opportunity to change how services are run without the messiness of terminating an agreement early. Some contracts are already effectively management contracts rather than traditional franchises, giving the DFT more direct control. It's a complex patchwork of different arrangements out there, and each one will present its own set of circumstances when its time is up. Regional factors could play a part too. Are there particular areas where the government feels rail services are letting down the local economy or failing to meet levelling up objectives? If so, operators in those regions might find themselves higher up the pecking order for a change in management. The political landscape can also shift priorities. A change in government or even just a new transport secretary could bring a different emphasis or accelerate certain plans. It's a movable feast, this railway business. One also wonders about the domino effect. Does the nationalisation of SWR make it easier politically or operationally to do the same elsewhere? Perhaps it sets a precedent, or perhaps the lessons learned from that transition will inform how subsequent ones are handled. It's all rather like assembling a very large, very complicated model railway. You start with one section, learn a few things, and then apply that knowledge to the next bit of track. Of course, it's not always about poor performance or financial woes. Sometimes it's simply about the strategic direction set by the government. If the ultimate aim is a more integrated, centrally managed railway under the banner of Great British Railways, then even well-performing TOCs might eventually find their contracts replaced by new arrangements as the system evolves. It's a long game, and the pieces are still being moved around the board. So while we can point to operators who seem more likely candidates based on current form or contractual situations, the truth is the exact order and timing remain largely behind closed doors at the Department for Transport. It's a watching brief for most of us, but you can be sure that every late train and every disgruntled tweet is being noted somewhere, potentially influencing who's next to get that call from Whitehall. It keeps things interesting, if nothing else. Chapter 3. Now, you'll have heard talk of Great British Railways, or GBR. It sounds rather grand, doesn't it? A bit like something from a more optimistic, perhaps slightly sepia-tinted age of rail travel. But what exactly is it, and how does a train operating company, whether newly nationalised or still clinging on, earn this rather distinguished-sounding title? Is it a genuine transformation, or are we just talking about a new logo on the side of the carriages and a different letterhead for the complaints department? Great British Railways, as envisioned by the powers that be, is intended to be the new guiding mind for the railways. Think of it as a single public body responsible for the whole shebang infrastructure currently Network Rail's job and the passenger services currently run by the various TOCs. The idea is to end the fragmentation that has, according to its proponents, plagued the railways since privatization, leading to a lack of coordination, confusing ticketing, and sometimes a rather adversarial relationship between track and train. So, how does a TOC get to wear the GBR badge? Well, it's not so much about earning it in the way you might earn a gold star at school. As services are brought under more direct public control, or as new contracts are issued that align with GBR's objectives, they will naturally become part of this new overarching structure. For a nationalised operator like potentially the new iteration of South Western Railway, it would likely be subsumed into the GBR framework as a matter of course. It's less an award, more an organisational shift. The supposed benefits of GBR are quite appealing on paper. We're promised simpler, more flexible ticketing, a holy grail for many passengers bewildered by the current array of fares, better coordination of timetables so your connecting train doesn't pull away just as you're huffing and puffing down the platform, a more unified brand making the railways feel like a single, coherent network again, and crucially, a long-term strategic vision for investment and improvement rather than the sometimes short-term focus driven by franchise lengths. The big question, of course, is whether GBR will actually deliver on these promises. It's easy to draw up a lovely plan, but implementing it across such a vast and complex network with all its ingrained practices and vested interests is another matter entirely. One can't help but feel a twinge of that typically British skepticism. We've heard grand promises before, haven't we? The proof, as they say, will be in the punctuality of the pudding or something like that. The role of GBR will be multifaceted. It will manage the infrastructure, plan the services, set the fares, and essentially be the public face of the railways. It will also be responsible for awarding contracts to private companies to run some services, if that model persists in certain areas, though these would likely be tightly specified concession contracts, where GBR takes the revenue risk and pays the operator a fee to run the trains. It's a significant centralization of power and responsibility. And what about the branding? Will we see a return to a unified livery, perhaps a modern take on the old British Rail double arrow logo, which, let's be honest, was a design classic? A strong, consistent brand can do wonders for creating a sense of a national network, but it also needs to be backed up by substance. A shiny new paint job on a train that's habitually late won't fool anyone for long. Still, a bit of visual cohesion wouldn't go amiss after years of kaleidoscopic liveries. It's important to distinguish GBR from the old British Rail. While it shares the characteristic of being a public body, the architects of GBR are keen to stress it will be different, more commercially astute, more passenger-focused, and learning from the lessons of the past, both good and bad. Whether it can truly escape the perceived pitfalls of state control, such as potential political interference or bureaucratic inertia, remains to be seen. It's a balancing act, like trying to serve a full English breakfast on a pendolino going round a sharp curve. Passengers will, quite rightly, be asking, "What's in it for me?" Beyond the promises of simpler fares and better timetables, will services become more reliable? Will stations be cleaner and better maintained? Will there be more staff on hand to help? These are the tangible things that make a difference to the daily grind. GBR will need to demonstrate visible improvements relatively quickly, if it's to win over a public that has, it's fair to say, become somewhat weary of railway reorganizations. Ultimately, GBR represents a very significant attempt to reshape Britain's railways. It's more than just a new name. It's intended to be a fundamental change in how the network is run, planned and delivered. Whether it succeeds in ushering in a new golden age of rail or simply becomes another chapter in the long and complicated history of Britain's railways is something we'll only discover as the plans unfold and the trains hopefully keep running. It's a monumental task, and one hopes they've packed enough sandwiches for the journey. Chapter 4. Now here's a rather tantalizing thought. Free travel. With the railways coming under more direct government control, or at least a more centralized public body like Great British Railways, does this open the door to more people traveling for free or at significantly reduced cost? It's the sort of idea that probably makes Treasury officials wake up in a cold sweat, but for passengers it's an intriguing prospect. Could nationalisation mean an expansion of free travel zones or concessionary schemes? At present, free travel on the UK's railways is a bit of a patchwork quilt. In London, you have the Freedom Pass for older and disabled residents, which is a fantastic boon. Railway staff, understandably, often get travel benefits, and there are various local or specific schemes dotted around, but a widespread national system of free rail travel for certain groups, or even universally, is something quite different. It's a lovely idea, but the practicalities, as ever, are a bit of a sticking point. Why might nationalisation or the GBR model lead to an expansion? Well, one argument is social equity. If the railways are truly a public service, then perhaps access to them should be wider, especially for those on lower incomes, young people seeking education or work, or older people who rely on public transport. Removing cost as a barrier could have significant social benefits, connecting communities and enabling opportunities. It would certainly be a bold statement of public service principle. However, and it's a rather large however, there's the small matter of who pays. Trains, tracks, staff, electricity, it all costs a rather enormous amount of money. If fares are reduced or abolished for significant numbers of people, that revenue has to be replaced from somewhere, and that somewhere usually means the general taxpayer. So, while some might travel for free, everyone else could end up paying more in taxes to subsidise it. It's a classic case of there's no such thing as a free lunch, or in this case, a free journey from Crewe to Carlisle. There are also economic arguments to consider. Proponents might say that increased mobility boosts the economy, getting more people to jobs, shops and leisure activities. Opponents might worry about overcrowding if trains suddenly become free and the potential for services to be overwhelmed, leading to a decline in quality for everyone. Plus, how do you manage demand? Would you need to book a free seat far in advance? it all gets rather complicated rather quickly. Looking internationally, some countries or cities have experimented with free public transport, often with mixed results. Tallinn in Estonia is one example, and Luxembourg made all public transport free. The contexts are often very different though, smaller networks, different funding models. What works in a compact European city-state might not scale so easily to the entirety of Great Britain's rather sprawling and heavily used railway network. It's not a simple copy and paste job. Perhaps a more realistic prospect than universal free travel is an expansion or simplification of concessionary fares. Could nationalisation lead to a national standard for discounts for young people, students, seniors or job seekers, making it easier and cheaper for these groups to use the trains? This seems a more achievable goal, and one that could still deliver significant benefits without completely upending the financial model of the railways. It's about finding a balance, isn't it? The political dimension is, of course, huge. Promising more free or cheaper travel is often a vote winner, but delivering it in a sustainable way is the tricky part. Any government would have to weigh the popularity of such a move against the fiscal implications and the potential impact on service quality. It's a decision that would require a great deal of careful thought and probably quite a few heated debates in Parliament. One could imagine targeted schemes, perhaps free travel for those actively seeking employment to attend interviews, or more generous discounts for apprentices. These sorts of initiatives could be seen as an investment in the country's future, but extending it much beyond that would require a fundamental rethink of how we value and fund public transport. It's a noble aspiration, certainly, but one that bumps up against cold, hard cash. So while the idea of gliding silently and freely across the country by train under a new nationalised system is a rather pleasant daydream, the reality is likely to be more nuanced. We might see some improvements in affordability, perhaps some new concessions, but a widespread expansion of completely free travel zones? I wouldn't hold my breath for that just yet. Unless, of course, someone invents a train that runs on good intentions. Now that would be something. Chapter 5. Right, let's talk timelines. It's all very well discussing these grand plans for nationalisation and Great British Railways, but when is all this actually going to happen? If you're a regular commuter on a line that isn't South Western Railway, you might be wondering when, or indeed if, your local rattler is due for its governmental makeover. As with most large-scale public projects, the timetable is, shall we say, subject to a degree of flexibility. We have our first fixed point, South Western Railway, which, as we know, transitioned to public control on May 20th. This is the starting pistol, the first train to leave the station under this new dispensation. But the rest of the network, that's a much longer and more winding track. There isn't a single date when all franchises suddenly end and GBR takes over everything in one fell swoop. That would be, to put it mildly, a bit chaotic. The key things to watch are the expiry dates of the current train operating company contracts. Most of these agreements have a fixed term, and as each one approaches its end, the Department for Transport has a window of opportunity to implement changes. Some contracts are due to expire in the next year or two, others have longer to run. This staggered approach means that any widespread nationalisation or transition to GBR-managed contracts will inevitably be a gradual process, unfolding over several years. The Williams-Shapps plan for rail, which set out the vision for GBR, didn't give a precise day-by-day schedule for every TOC. It was more of a strategic roadmap. However, it did indicate an ambition to move towards the new model relatively briskly once the necessary legislation is in place and GBR itself is fully established as an organisation. But briskly in government terms can still mean a period of years, not months. There are many legislative and logistical hurdles to clear. One must always factor in the notorious tendency for large government projects to encounter unforeseen delays. Timelines can be affected by all sorts of things. Political shifts, a general election, for instance, could change priorities or personnel. Economic conditions, a recession might squeeze funding for big reforms, or simply the sheer complexity of unpicking existing arrangements and setting up new ones. It's like trying to predict your arrival time when there are leaves on the line, engineering works, and a security alert at the preceding station. Optimism is advisable, but so is a good book. It's likely we'll see a phased approach. Perhaps operators whose contracts are ending soonest, or those deemed to be performing particularly poorly, will be prioritised. Or maybe there'll be a geographical logic, focusing on certain regions at a time to build up the GBR network piece by piece. The government hasn't laid out an explicit batting order for the talks, so there's a fair amount of educated guesswork involved in predicting who follows SWR and when. The actual process of transferring a service from a private operator to public control or to a new GBR-led concession is a fiendishly complicated undertaking. Staff 2P transfers, asset registers, IT systems, safety certifications, ongoing projects. It all needs to be managed meticulously to ensure a smooth handover and, crucially, to keep the trains running safely and reliably for passengers during the transition. This isn't something you can do over a bank holiday weekend, so if you're looking for a definitive date when your specific line will be nationalised or become part of GBR, you might be waiting a while for that precise information. Realistically, we're looking at a process that will likely span the mid-2020s and possibly beyond for the entire network to be operating under the new model. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Think of it as a very long-distance train journey with several changes along the way. In the interim, many services are already operating under what are known as National Rail Contracts, or previously Emergency Recovery Measures Agreements, ERMAs. These were put in place during the pandemic and effectively mean the government already bears most of the revenue risk and has much greater control over service specifications. So in some ways, the journey towards greater public control is already well underway, even if the final GBR branding and structures aren't yet in place everywhere. The best advice is to keep an eye on announcements from the Department for Transport and the developing Great British Railways organisation. As contracts expire and decisions are made, more details will emerge, but for now it's a case of understanding that this is a significant long-term reform programme. It's not a quick fix, but a gradual rebuilding of the railway landscape. Patience, as any regular train user knows, is a virtue. Outro. Well, there we have it. A bit of a canter through the rather complex and, dare I say, occasionally bewildering world of UK railway nationalisation. As you can see, it's not just a simple case of waving a magic wand and declaring all trains to be property of the people. There are layers of history, finance, politics, and sheer operational practicality that make this a journey with many more stops and undoubtedly a few unexpected delays along the way. It's a developing story, and one that will affect millions of us. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, perhaps even mildly entertaining, and you'd like to keep up with the twists and turns of the UK's railways, then please do the usual YouTube things. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on the UK's railways, because goodness knows there will be more updates. It's the gift that keeps on giving, this railway saga. And finally, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you make of all this? Is nationalisation the golden ticket to a brighter railway future, or just another expensive diversion? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on railway nationalisation and what it could mean for you. Will your commute improve? Will the sandwiches in the buffet car get better? These are the important questions, right? That's us for now. Cheerio.